You're watching Business Unusual here on Newsroom Africa Channel 405. It is Startup Monday. Now, the long-awaited policy direction to ICASA on the licensing of a high-demand spectrum has finally been published. This afternoon, we take a look at the published spectrum policy direction and attempt to answer what this is going to mean for entrepreneurs in digital industries, telecoms industries, or any industry in the information age that is reliant on a consistent and reliable connection. And joining me for this conversation is Leon Rawls. He's from the Progressive Blacks in Information and Communication Technology, PBICT. I'm also joined by Veronica Mutlautsi, who's the Chief Executive at Smart Digital Solutions. Leon and Veronica, good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Just briefly, before we start, maybe Veronica, I'll start off with you. If you could just briefly explain the work that you guys do, just to give us a context as to your own background, and Leon, I'll ask you to do the same as well.
Okay, Smart Digital has been formed 2 years ago to take opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution. Okay. So we participate in connectivity. We are licensed by ICASA, and we also play a role in the Smart Digital solution space. That is your IoT, Internet of Things, smart data analytics, as well as other IoT opportunities within the health sector.
Okay. Some of you might not know what IoT is. That's the Internet of Things. Leon, what do you do?
Basically, what we do, I'm representing Progressive Blacks in ICT today. We fight for a simple thing, access and ownership.
Sure.
And that is for us to play in the ICT space and also to eradicate all the gatekeeping that has been there. We have a membership of about 2,000 across the country, and we have provincial structures throughout South Africa. And we've got hungry SMMEs that have been deprived. We've got the youth that's part of us.
Sure.
And our fight, yes, is for them, and that's what we've been fighting for up until now.
Okay, Leon, just trace some of the steps you've taken in that fight, because we do know there was a big debate here when there were hearings around this issue between whether or not we wanted a wholesale open access network or whether or not, as many of the private players, many of the established guys wanted, just to have an auction of the high demand spectrum so that they could make their foray into the fifth generation stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that the whole idea and concept, and we've seen in Russia, we've seen in Kenya and other models where they've tried to implement the one, where you see the telcos basically showing that they don't really like the concept. Obviously, anyone that has monopolized for so long wouldn't want new players coming in. So our fight started then, especially when you remember Minister Kwele and ICASA taking each other to court and those things, and whatever background that obviously played there, up until the point where there was actually input on the amendment of the entire legislation, the entire act as we know it. Now, there you can say it was a battle between Goliath and David, because you had your small players wanting the one, you had obviously your big guys not wanting it, and the fight for also obviously the high demand spectrum and so forth. So after we made our submissions and we really put on a strong fight as PBICT with the Chamber, Youth Economic Alliance, as well as Sabispa. So when we pushed forward for the fight up until the point where the act basically was changing to, to come on our side. Yeah. There was a shock at some moment when the minister actually withdrew it, but also there was a huge surprise. I remember everyone was celebrating in our different platforms when the bill actually came out, the policy directive, and actually approving the implementation of the one. But what is surprising is that if you have to look at the fight before, when everyone was saying we want high demand spectrum so we can reduce the cost of data, so that we can extend the network, but at the same time people claiming they've got 95% coverage, but yet they still want the one. And so those are some of the issues that we were fighting with along the way. But all of a sudden, you find that the minister then releases the directive. All of a sudden, necessarily does not mean that data prices will drop. And we're saying it is going to drop. Yeah. Once a one is implemented and it is going to happen, it will drop.
Veronica, I want to bring you in here because you were touching on a lot of the work that you do, be it in data analytics or even the Internet of Things.
Yes.
Many people who are watching this, who are sitting in villages or in rural areas, might be asking themselves, yes, many of these new age technologies might be a thing in the urban core, but we see that when it comes to the rapid deployment of infrastructure, network infrastructure for the last 2 decades, Much of that has happened in the suburbs, and very little has happened in our townships. And that's why you find people, you know, in 2019 celebrating fiber going into Soweto. And I then asked the question, if we celebrate that now, what are we going to be celebrating in 50 years?
Sure. So I just want to start by saying that Owen is a victory for small entrepreneurs, right? And it will also add benefit to places where we're underserved,
Sure.
okay? When the big mobile operators were saying that they're sitting on 95%, they were referring to the urban areas, all right? And in terms of the 3G, you see that, or 4G, you'll find that in the rural areas, you are covered around 45%, okay? And because of also the business case around rolling out the network. So with this network, okay, places like in the rural areas and other township will have then access through 5G.
Sure,
okay?
sure.
And in that also, because of the cost of implementing 5G, it will reduce the cost of infrastructure, thereby reduce the cost of data. So we, as small businesses, we say that our business case should be around reducing the cost of data, especially in rural areas, so that we can deploy digital solutions like telemedicine or telehealth, so that we can deploy services such as digital education. Those are the services that are required. And in the rural areas, that's where you need to also forge entrepreneurship, you know, by making sure that you bridge that digital divide. They are in the digital economy, and they can create products and services that are required for them to compete locally and globally.
How easy is it, Veronica, for a young woman in Kuruman to be able to access some of this high demand spectrum that's going to be in the world? I mean, what kind of process ought they to follow? Because sometimes we have this conversation at a very high level, and people might be asking themselves, you know, in my province, I don't even know where the office of ICASA is, and what process I ought to follow, and how much maybe I should pay to be able to license some of the spectrum.
Sure. So one of the processes is to also get yourself on the internet, okay? Once you are on the internet, research is very important,
Sure.
okay? And what ICASA and other companies within the department should then have stakeholder engagement, educating, you know, everyone, including the people in the rural area, how to obtain spectrum license, what are the process and everything. And with the new policy direction, we are happy that the cost of entry has been reduced, hopefully, you know, so that everyone will be able to participate fairly. But it also talks about stakeholder engagement, so that everybody knows what is the process.
Sure.
So it's not going to be run, and hopefully don't be run only within certain groups of people. It should be something that is spread out there, and everyone is given the opportunity.
Okay. Leon, have the costs really of accessing this declined? I mean, I know one of the licenses, I think electronic communication service license, you're probably parting with around 12,000 Rand just to get that one license, and you might, as you go along, need other licenses, and it's quite a sizable amount of money, and I don't think we can assume everybody has that kind of money.
Yeah. That's the big challenge, and that's the big question, the problem that we have to solve. I mean, currently, if you want to play in the telco space correctly, so if you want your class licenses, because your individual license are currently non-moratorium, you'll have to pay around 28,000 Rand just for the license before you even start operating. And then you have the issue of, like you've said, where is the ICASA office in that particular area, and then the waiting period of it as well. So those are some of the challenges that you'll have. And if you also have to look at the auctioning of the spectrum, or the cost of the spectrum, right? I mean, you look at in the United States, I think Google built they had about $6 billion for the one. That's what we were looking at, right? So if you have to look at those things, it's definitely not going to be cheap. However, we have to, if you look, for example, in KZN, the MEC of Economic Development, if you look at her budget speech, she's talking about the one, and she's talking about fast-tracking broadband rollout, and the state-owned entities that are below that, then coming in to muscle in and also assisting in terms of, you know, acquiring the spectrum and those things. Now you go back and you look at the reason why we're implementing the one is because of SA Connect, which is then Broadband Infraco, is then the champion of rolling out.
Which is a state-owned company,
It's a state-owned entity, it's a state-owned company. So you look at that and you have to see also the infrastructure that they have. And so if you're using that to to then assist and be part of the one. So you're already resolving some of the challenges that you have. But in terms of the people down there, how then do they participate in that? We are looking at a model where we are saying that we need to build community-based networks, right? So if you're going to a ward, doesn't matter wherever it is, we're saying that communities must form cooperatives, and then we will then assist them and in terms of setting up their companies and also providing their own network and competing at a ward level. So your MTN, Vodacom, and whoever is out there, they must compete with the local community at that level. And it's the only way in which you're going to get this thing to be started. So we've started a lot of engagements as PBICT. Recently, we were at Mpumalanga on the Saturday at a school where we are starting to teach even the youth so that they can understand moving forward where to go. We had also a boot camp, and that would be going around all provinces, where we are actually teaching the youth in terms of how do you set up a telco. So we've got a whole program and all of those things. And also with the 4IR in it, if you have to look, one of the key things is if you look talking IoT, you're talking whatever technologies, they have to be connected. Where are they going to be connected? So these are some of the things that, that we're looking at. But in terms of the cost, it's going to be very nice and very challenging. But however, we need, I think, as South Africa, to learn to invest in our own infrastructure.
Veronica, you want to weigh in there briefly just before we go to the break? Because I know when we come back from the break, we're going to be taking a look at some of the tweets. But in relation to the cost issues that Leon is raising, are you finding a similar kind of picture?
Yes, I went through the process when I was acquiring my license, where I had to pay substantial amount of money, you know, to get a license. And the process indeed took long, you know. So as part of the structure in the industry, they need to look at simplifying some of those processes and removing those barriers to entry. So that is really important, because we as small businesses, our product stacks are dependent on rolling it out to townships and rural areas. So we really want this in order to expand and succeed in this environment.
Okay, let's pause there and of course encourage some of our viewers here to send us their questions, and also, I mean, you might have your own concerns and comments. Do send those through and tweet us on @405business_. You can also send those comments on WhatsApp, and our number is 072-110-5584. On the other side of this break, I continue with the Leon and Veronica, and we'll also take a look at some of the tweets you sent through. I did ask a question over the last few days or so. What would it take for some of us, I guess, to go into our pockets to finance some of the community networks that Leon was talking about? And I must say, some of the responses were nothing short of interesting. I'll take a look at some of those responses on the other side of this break. Business Unusual on this Monday. It is Startup Monday, and I'm in studio with Leon Rolls. He's the president of Progressive Blacks in ICT, PBICT, and also joined by Veronica Mutlauzi from Smart Digital Solutions, and also now joined in studio by Afrika Mkangala, who's the president of the Youth Economic Alliance. And we're talking about Spectrum and how the Wholesale Open Access Network, the WOAN, is set to benefit many young entrepreneurs who are reliant on connectivity in the course of their operations. And before we bring Africa into our conversation and take a look at some of the key issues here, I asked some of you on social media whether or not you would contribute to some form of collective saving or crowdfunding to finance community networks. Fully aware, of course, of some of the challenges many people have in rural villages and in some of our townships in accessing connectivity. And these were some of your answers. Let's take a look at some of those tweets, and once we've done that, discuss some of those with my guests. Now, Gideon Brits said European governments are obliged by the EU to assist in providing fast-speed internet. We all crowdfund already. It's called tax, and that fund is 1,200 billion. We get the administrators we vote for. We choose to stay behind in a racist paradise while the world moves on. Let's take a look at another one. Switch off TV, read a book. What an interesting name this is. Some of us can even contribute our skills. This subject is closest to my heart. Minister Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams always talks about the 4IR, but many townships don't have basic access to internet connection at decent speeds like many suburbs. Our people in townships will miss the 4IR wave. Let's take a look at another tweet there, and he says he would begrudgingly support this. Kanti, what's the purpose of UWASA? And I'll ask my guest to comment, I guess, on UWASA, which is aimed at touching on some of the underserved segments. And then the PR statements of Babaka Q on Twitter said, I would really support this. I recently installed fiber at my home, and the marked difference it has made, I was left thinking, what was I waiting for? And this is just on the entertainment side. Rural people would be upskilled and make a difference in their lives too, and less migration, I assume, migration to the urban areas. Africa, afternoon to you, my brother. How are you?
Afternoon. How are you?
Let me bring you in here, because I think much of the tweets here are flagging the issue of the digital divide, which is something as the Youth Economic Alliance is quite close to much of the work that you do. And I'm quite interested in, I guess, some of your comments on those tweets and, of course, your view on UASA. One of the guys there saying we already pay tax, and many would say the telcos already contribute to UASA. Why would we want to create a parallel sort of crowdfund now to do what our taxes and some of the telco contributions ought to be doing?
Well, I think I'll openly admit our own bias. Firstly, we are entrepreneurs. So we don't confine to what a state-owned entity would do.
Sure.
Ours is to create solutions. And this one and any other spectrum conversation, like my sister over here said, presents an opportunity for us as people who are in business, regardless of the level, to then participate.
Sure.
So what USASA would be doing and would not be doing, whether they are failing or not, our ambitions as young people who are in business, who are entrepreneurs, is not hinged on that.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, okay. Veronica, let me bring you in here, and I like the point Africa makes, which is that the connectivity being extended to where it's needed the most would potentially create space for other business activities over and above that. And that could be e-commerce, it could be mobile payments, it could even be the generation of local content. And we've seen many young people working in that space as vloggers, as people who are creating all manner of digital content. And if you can give that pathway to their audience in a way that is accessible, it certainly would do wonders for the kind of brand partnerships and the revenues they could build.
Sure. If you look at connectivity, it's the foundation to 4IR. So there's no debate around it. So everyone needs connectivity. It's a basic right now, even people in the rural area, okay? Once they've got activity, then they will be able to participate on the internet. So they will get a domain name, they'll have an identity, they'll have an address. So from there, through the different types of skills within the 4IR, they will be able to build apps.
Sure.
They will be able to build e-commerce solution, whatever platform they want to build, so that they can easily roll it out or launch to the market. So those are the opportunities that comes with fast connectivity or high-speed connectivity, and hence we needed to prioritize that. You know, as a woman looking at other women who are in rural areas, you know, women are more entrepreneurial. They will be given an opportunity to sell their product, their clothes and everything on the internet using Facebook, Instagram, or whatever platform that will be available at that time. So that's why I am excited about WEN, and I'm excited that it's targeted for Black people, women, or youth who should be participating in this. I think the gap in the market gives us opportunities as small businesses to go in and create these services with either for women or being in the health industry or education industry. This is an opportunity for us to grab.
Leon, Veronica has mentioned, I guess, some of the opportunities that could potentially emerge, be it in e-commerce, be it in the creation and development of apps, and many other things that would piggyback on this connectivity. The other question that many people might be asking themselves is, as a first stage, many people would consider, I guess, extending some of this connectivity for free, and then they might be asking themselves, how would I sustain that if indeed I set up a community network, people access it for free? What are some of the revenue models that you've seen in the work that you've done that could potentially, I guess, make for an interesting investment and business case?
Yeah, I think that the free connectivity, yes, you'll get it, and we've seen it in some of the hotspots, obviously funded and sponsored by government. But every network, you still need to commercialize it in some way or the other. So, for example, I was just looking at some of the tweets of talking about infrastructure. You're not going to get fiber all over the country now. You're not going to do that. But the reality is that we do have a very good backhaul through broadband infraco. You've also got Centec in terms of the wireless. So if you bring your microwave to the villages, now I want to just make a very simple example. If you have to look at how much people pay just for DSTV, right? Even in the rural areas,
Yes.
right? But as soon as you bring connectivity into there, it reduces the cost of DSTV. You can now use Showmax, you can use Netflix, you can use those things, right? And if you've got a good 10 megabit connection. But again, let's go back to the spectrum issue. If you're running and you're providing a network on an unlicensed spectrum, then you're going to battle and people are not going to get the service that they really should be getting. That is why we are excited about the spectrum, because you'll be able to give people a low latency connection, even in the very rural areas. So some of the things that we were looking at in terms when you look at the revenue models and those things, why do we need to access data that is sitting at NAP? And I'm sitting lame, toba. Must connect all the way and bring data and come and connect to data here. So in rural areas, we are talking about open access labs.
Sure.
We were saying there must be data centers everywhere. Use schools, use all those facilities. And in that way, you can now actually have servers that are nearby,
Yes.
and you can actually share content and do those things, right? Now, if you look at streaming alone, right? If you look at streaming, you look at music, there's a lot of revenue that is coming out of there. Even the connectivity itself, it's 185 billion rand revenue stream annually, right? Collectively, if you look at telecoms and you look at your production and your digital SAPC and so forth, it's 280 billion. So there's huge opportunities. And like Veronica said, you're only looking in rural areas at 40%. So it opens a huge range
There's
of
a big
things.
gap in
There's a big
provision.
gap in that, yeah. So lastly, one of the things that we're pushing as PBICT, we're saying varsity by day and school by night.
Okay.
School by day, varsity by night, sorry.
Okay.
Right. So
Sure.
if you're having people that are in the training space, we're calling universities that they must digitize the learning.
curriculums, yeah.
Yes, digitize the curriculum. So that in a school, when children go home, it becomes a varsity. So now you're attending university.
Okay.
Now, even have to look at that alone, it also creates a whole range of things. The unemployed graduates can then become the people that are lecturing this. So
Leon,
those are some
let
of
me
the
give
things.
Africa the last word here, because I think you're touching on something very important when it comes to having the service there, having the training where people are. And I guess many people are saying it's not enough to just facilitate digital participation, but we also need to be playing in that value chain, in the hardware, in the software, in the development of some of the content itself. As the Youth Economic Alliance, what are some of the things that you are considering in that space that you're willing to share with us as viewers as we wrap up?
Well, we've already started, and we work in partnership with PBICT, Sabispe, and other organizations. And we run a couple of workshops. Last week, we had a very successful telecoms workshop, which actually focused on the fiber-related technical aspects of it. We'll be running ones that will focus on maybe the more commercialization and looking at setting it up as businesses. Because what you find in the sector is that there are so many variant skills. So you cannot assume that the person who will install your fiber, which is an important skill, is the same person who's able to raise financing. And where all of this goes and why we work together is that our general ethos is we've taken a step back to say, okay, what is 4IR? What is WAN? What is spectrum? How does it affect us? All the way from the most suburban of areas to the most rural of areas. And that's where the conversations have been. And almost projecting and saying, what is the type of future that we want for South Africa? So we want interconnected communities. A community can remain in a rural area without the biggest of buildings, but must have the most basic of infrastructure. And one of the basic right now that we are all thriving for is this connectivity. So I can be on a farm, I can be in a very, very rural area, but I am then able to communicate. Because what is spectrum? How does it help the layman person? It's an avenue for us to send data, to communicate.
And transmit messages. That's
exactly.
what it is,
Which is how then, in the fight to say, bring down the cost of data. That's the cost of communicating. There's nothing else that data is.
Africa, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and it's a real pity. I mean, I certainly love these conversations. Africa, Veronica, and Leon, thank you so much for joining us. That's a wrap from us here at the team at Business Unusual. If you missed our conversation or you caught us in the middle of it, you can still catch us on Catch Up. Also, of course, take a look at a repeat of this particular conversation, and also take a look at 405business_ on Twitter. We'll be playing back some of the key and the salient parts of this conversation. We'll have to leave it there this afternoon, and do stay tuned to Newsroom Africa, channel 405.